A headline claims scientists have finally proved the existence of the soul. That phrase holds weight because science feels authoritative. We trust labs, numbers, peer-reviewed papers. So when someone says researchers have confirmed something spiritual, it catches attention. But what does that actually mean? In most cases, it means scientists observed something interesting, something unexplained, and the media translated it into soul-confirmed. That leap is seductive because it connects science and spirituality in a tidy package. Neuroscience, psychology, and physics have studied consciousness, near-death experiences, brain activity after clinical death. Some find patterns. Some see unexplained signals. But none of this is evidence of a soul existing independently of the body. Take near-death experiences. Some people report tunnels of light, a feeling of peace, vivid memories. About 10 to 20% of patients resuscitated after clinical death describe it. But these experiences correlate with brain chemistry, oxygen deprivation, drugs, or stress on specific brain regions. They don't prove consciousness survives death. In fact, the more researchers investigate, the more they find biological explanations. Brain scans show activity in areas linked to vision, emotion, memory, even when someone is close to death. If consciousness persisted after death, we'd expect to see continued activity. Instead, the brain goes silent. When patients are revived, they recall experiences, but those memories form after brain activity resumes. It's like remembering a vivid dream. That doesn't mean dreams are proof of an afterlife. Another claim involves electronic voice phenomena, recordings where believers say they hear unseen voices after a person dies. Investigators often find natural explanations: background noise, audio pareidolia, or deliberate manipulation. It doesn't amount to scientific proof. Sometimes, scientists detect unexplained signals or fields. That's how science progresses, by exploring the unknown. But unexplained doesn't equal supernatural. Today's mystery is tomorrow's discovery. Measuring something you don't yet understand means you haven't confirmed a soul, only that you've found something to study. Interestingly, some physicists discuss hypothetical information fields or quantum mind theories. These are speculative frameworks to explore consciousness using advanced math. They don't say spirits exist. They suggest consciousness might be more complex than we think. That's curiosity, not confirmation. On the psychology side, studies reveal cognitive biases. Humans are pattern seekers. We see intention in random events. We attribute meaning to coincidences. When grief meets silence, we hear voices in white noise. That is brain function, not proof of life after death. Some studies show brain activity continues for a brief moment after cardiac arrest. That's fascinating. That might mean people experience vivid mental events in the moments before complete shutdown. But again, it's still brain-based. It doesn't mean the mind becomes independent of the body, just that the dying brain can fire off complex signals. True proof of a soul would require the ability to document consciousness continuing after the brain stops permanently. We would need verified, reproducible examples where someone is conscious with no brain activity. None exist. If anything, every controlled case supports the idea that consciousness depends on the brain. Think of it this way: electricity powers a lamp. You kill the power. The lamp goes dark. You don't assume the light moved into the wall. You don't say the lamp had an invisible soul. You check the wires. You test the switch. Same principle with consciousness. Real breakthroughs in neuroscience keep showing us how mental states map to brain states. Damage, chemical changes, stimulation, they alter personality, memory, emotion. That's not just coincidence. That's evidence that our identity is brain-based. So when someone says science has proved the soul, what they usually mean is that science doesn't yet have an answer. They might have found interesting anomalies. But anomalies don't equal validation of religious or spiritual claims. Yet the idea that science could prove the soul is attractive. It promises reconciliation between material understanding and existential longing. It feels like a missing piece. But longing for a conclusion doesn't make that conclusion accurate. Scientists who investigate these edge cases don't usually claim to have confirmed spirituality. They talk about, it's important to separate what scientists find from how headlines frame it. Curiosity and mystery don't prove eternal life. They show areas where we still lack understanding. Humanity has believed in the soul for thousands of years, long before science existed. That belief served purposes, comfort, meaning, moral frameworks. It's deeply rooted in culture. But just because belief is ancient and widespread doesn't make it true. The fact that belief persists and stories are powerful is sociological, not scientific. We share myths for social cohesion. We pass them down because they comfort us. That doesn't make them facts. In the 21st century, science gives us better tools to test claims. We can scan brains, record electrical activity, track neurological damage. And every test so far points toward consciousness being an emergent property of physical brain activity. If faith needs a scientific boost to survive, that reveals its foundation. If belief can't stand without a resurrected brain or electronic signal, maybe it's simpler to accept that consciousness is biological. Authentic spirituality doesn't demand confirmation. Meaning doesn't depend on supernatural proof. People find purpose in relationships, creativity, learning, compassion. Those things are real, measurable, and don't require mythology to make sense. This doesn't dismiss all experiences or why people feel something real happened. It simply recognizes that brain science offers plausible explanations, and that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. We're still learning. Some questions are harder than others. But the strongest principle we have is this: if consciousness flows only when the brain is active. If there's no documented case of it continuing past that point, then the safest conclusion is that what we call when we talk about the soul, we're often really talking about identity, memory, personality, the part of ourselves that feels continuous across time. But these things don't float free from the body. They rely on it. They emerge from it. When the body breaks down, those traits begin to disappear too. Think about neurodegenerative diseases. Alzheimer's is one of the clearest examples. A person can forget their family, their past, even their own name. Their personality may shift completely. If the soul were separate and untouchable, why would it vanish when the brain deteriorates? Why wouldn't the soul preserve memories that the brain forgets? These questions aren't meant to dismiss the human experience. They're about aligning belief with observation. If everything we associate with the soul can be changed, erased, or damaged by brain activity, then it becomes very hard to argue that the soul is something fixed and immortal. Still, people want to believe. And it's understandable. The idea of a soul promises more than survival. It promises continuity. It tells us we are more than cells and circuits. That our loved ones live on. That death isn't really the end. That's deeply emotional. But emotion isn't evidence. A few researchers have explored whether consciousness could have quantum origins. This led to popular but misunderstood theories, like quantum consciousness or the idea that awareness is somehow stored in the universe. These ideas sound scientific because they use complex terms. But when reviewed by actual physicists and neuroscientists, they don't hold up. Theories that rely on quantum mechanics to explain the soul rarely offer testable predictions. They're metaphors, not models. And if something can't be tested, it can't be confirmed. At best, it remains speculation, interesting, but not reliable. There are also stories of children claiming to recall past lives. These anecdotes spread quickly online. But follow-up studies often reveal contamination, coaching by adults, media exposure, or selective memory. No case has ever provided verifiable information that couldn't be obtained through natural means. People also point to out-of-body experiences. Someone in surgery sees themselves from above, then later describes the room. But many of these reports happen under anesthesia, a state known for altered perception. Some hospitals have tested this with hidden images placed in locations only visible from above. In studies where patients later reported floating above their bodies, none could accurately report the hidden images. That matters. It separates belief from reality. When tests are carefully controlled, the extraordinary claims tend to vanish. One frequently mentioned study is by Dr. Duncan McDougall in 1907, who attempted to measure the soul by weighing people before and after death. He reported a loss of about 21 grams, a number that caught public attention. But the experiment had multiple flaws. The sample size was small, the equipment was crude, and the results were inconsistent. Most importantly, no one has replicated his findings since. Today, the scientific community sees that experiment as more curiosity than evidence. So why does the idea of a soul still persist? Partly because it's useful. It helps people cope with grief. It provides a framework for meaning. It explains moral intuition. But usefulness doesn't equal truth. And comfort isn't proof. In societies where religious belief is strong, people often grow up equating morality with the soul. But when you separate belief from behavior, you start to see that ethics doesn't require metaphysics. People can care about others, value justice, and act with kindness, all without believing in an invisible essence. That's one of the quiet revolutions of the modern age. People are realizing that meaning, morality, and depth don't have to be anchored to ancient ideas. They can emerge from shared humanity. From reason. From experience. From the recognition that this life, right here, is the one we know we have. None of this discounts mystery. The universe is full of it. We don't fully understand consciousness. We don't fully understand time, space, or the nature of subjective experience. But not understanding something doesn't mean we get to insert a soul into the gap. That's not an answer. That's just replacing one unknown with another. The responsible path is to keep asking questions without rushing to conclusions. To admit what we don't know. And to value explanations that grow out of careful observation, not wishful thinking. What scientists are discovering isn't the soul, but something more. Scientific exploration into consciousness is ongoing. Some researchers study the neural basis of self-awareness, how we recognize our reflection, how we understand our own thoughts, and how we differentiate ourselves from others. These investigations uncover remarkable insights. Neural networks light up when a person thinks about themselves or others, and damage to those networks can change identity. This reinforces the idea that personal continuity is deeply rooted in the brain's structure and function. We see strong links between brain regions and mental states. Serotonin and dopamine shape mood. The prefrontal cortex helps us plan, reflect, and make moral decisions. Trauma rewires pathways. Brain injuries rewrite personality traits. If a soul existed apart from the body, why would these changes in brain structure mirror changes in what we think of as us? The evidence shows that who we are is inseparable from our physical brain. It helps to look at how patterns of belief develop. We're wired for survival narratives, stories that give us a sense of order, certainty, or justice. And souls offer that. They promise life after death, full identity, karmic balance. But once we know how these stories form, from cultural reinforcement, from psychological biases, from the brain's tendency to connect dots, we start to see them as evolved tools rather than truths. Anthropologists point out that the soul concept appears across cultures and time. Ancient Egypt, early Greece, indigenous tribes, each framed personhood in spiritual terms. But those soul ideas weren't universal. They varied dramatically. Some believed the soul split into many parts. Others saw it as an aura, a breath, a tie to nature. If souls were objectively real, why would the descriptions be so inconsistent? That inconsistency suggests humans created soul stories to make sense of death, behavior, personality. Myths of afterlife offer comfort, guide conduct, and justify social structures. That doesn't make them wrong, just human. One interesting angle is modern research into moral psychology. Experiments show that people view moral transgressions as worse when framed in religious terms. But secular appeals to compassion, harm, or fairness often lead to equal or stronger outcomes. A clear moral framework doesn't require a soul. It can arise from empathy and shared human interest. Some psychologists study how belief in life after death correlates with grief recovery. Those beliefs can ease mourning. But they don't actually alter the fact of mortality. They offer emotional shelter. If people use views of the soul to find solace, that's understandable. But solace isn't proof, it's comfort. What about the idea of a universal consciousness? Some propose that even empty space, quantum fields, or subatomic particles contain awareness. Quantum mysticism drew attention decades ago. It's often misunderstood as scientific spirituality. But most physicists reject the notion that elementary particles or wave functions are conscious. These models are metaphorical, not literal statements about the universe. The difference matters. When someone says consciousness might emerge from complex quantum states in the brain, it's a hypothesis that can eventually be tested. When someone says consciousness is simply a mercurial energy field beyond science, it becomes an unfalsifiable claim. That's not evidence. That's speculation. Let's take a real-world case, the dead brain patients who remained conscious. A few had strokes or epilepsy surgery with no signs of awareness yet later spoke or moved. These aren't near-death miracles, they're evidence of brain plasticity, hidden neural pathways, or misdiagnosis. In-depth scans later revealed activity they initially missed. These cases show that when we dig deeper, the mystery often dissolves. There's also research on memory under anesthesia. Some patients describe clear memories from the operating room. At first, it sounds like an out-of-body or soul-driven event. But investigations often reveal faulty memory recall. The stories are layered with imagination, emotion, the brain filling in gaps. That creates compelling narratives, but it doesn't confirm an immaterial self. Another area is technology-assisted brain simulation. When scientists manipulate the brain with electrodes, people hear voices, see visions, recall childhood events. That suggests the soul isn't listening in, it's emerging through neural patterns. Alter the connections, alter the experience. That's an embodied phenomenon, not an ethereal presence. If someone says modern science is critically, serious researchers in neuroscience explicitly state that any soul hypothesis must be testable to be scientific. If you claim consciousness can exist without brain function, you need to show cases where consciousness is observed with no brain. That hasn't happened. Even sharply reported anomalies in journals always find a neural explanation, or a faulty measurement, when scrutinized. This pattern reminds me of a principle: extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Claiming the existence of a soul is extraordinary. But the evidence falls short. We see correlations between brain activity and mental life. We don't see mental life independent of the brain. That doesn't diminish who we are. It elevates us. We are shaped by neurons that develop through millions of years. By molecules that obey physics. By systems that can reflect, learn, overcome, connect. The sense of self isn't cheap. It's incredible. We don't need to wrap it in myth to appreciate it. All this doesn't mean science has every answer. We still wrestle with the hard questions: what consciousness exactly is, how subjective experience arises from cells, why self-awareness feels so personal. These mysteries remain. But the default explanation, that consciousness comes from the brain, is backed by decades of research, not hopeful storytelling. Mixed among scientific discussions are personal reflections from scholars who grew up believing in the soul. Some even describe moments when they felt a presence, a shift, or a sudden clarity. These accounts are real, and powerful, but they're subjective. They don't survive external scrutiny. They speak to the richness of inner life, not to the existence of an entity beyond it. Personal meaning can be deeply felt. But permanence requires proof. Memories can change. Emotions can fade. Identities can shift. What lasts beyond the brain? So far, nothing. But what lasts within it, our stories, our relationships, our contributions, can be remarkable enough. When someone holds on to belief in an immortal soul, that belief serves a purpose. It helps them cope with grief. It gives them moral ground. It offers hope of reunion. Those are vital reasons. And they deserve respect. But they remain reasons of emotion, not evidence. I'm not saying these beliefs don't matter. Human needs matter. The desire for connection, meaning, legacy, those are real. The challenge arises when we treat emotionally satisfying beliefs as factual. Belief becomes a crutch outward rather than a guide inward. Understanding the brain doesn't diminish dignity. It grounds it. It shuts down fortune-telling about judgment, rewards, or punishment. It's a mirror, not a judge. A revealing lens, not a storyteller. It shows us how our minds work, and invites us to take responsibility for what we do with them. That responsibility leads to meaningful questions. How will you treat other people? How will you create community? How will you find purpose? These questions don't get answers from archaeology, philosophy, or metaphysics alone. They get partly answered through action, through empathy, through thinking and caring. Technology itself offers tools for living well. Virtual communities, medical care, creative platforms, science education, humanitarian action, these are powerful ways to find purpose. None of them need a soul. They need effort, not faith. Some say that without the promise of a soul, life loses value. That it strips away wonder, and leaves us in a bleak vacuum. But reality doesn't have to feel small. Knowing that this life is finite makes it precious. Understanding that we may not be eternal brings urgency, to love, to create, to improve. And practical values don't vanish without belief. People can still fight injustice, support others, teach, heal, explore. They can build legacies, raise families, confront suffering with dignity, all without needing an afterlife to justify it. If belief in a soul survives among scientists, it says something about human nature, not the nature of reality. It shows our enduring hope, our longing for more, our fear of ending, our desire for continuity. That doesn't make the soul real. It makes the soul a story we tell ourselves to feel less alone in the dark. Science still has work to do. We still don't know everything. Someday, new findings may surprise us. They may reveal complexities unimaginable today. But if those findings don't meet the standards of evidence, and that truth can be freeing. Understanding that we are extraordinary because we arose from natural processes doesn't diminish wonder. It magnifies it. Because it means that existence is remarkable, not because it transcends biology, but because it is its product. When the brain works, it creates magic. When the mind learns, it connects. When the self dies, it leaves change behind. Not eternal spirit. Not ghostly echo. Real impact. So, did scientists prove the soul? Not by any standard that counts in science. But they did prove something more profound, that we are made of something beautiful, fragile, complex. That a life can matter, without needing to be eternal. And that's enough.